ASISA up front as their presentation, but others come because their partners are concerned about their binge drinking or perhaps stimulant use, and often it's just that failure to come home. Sometimes the client will present with their partner in crisis following being caught. And the partner usually discovers these things through looking on devices, looking at emails, bank statements, phone bills, and some have even put GPS tracking devices on their partner's phones. And I'm going to give you a case example here, is Sam. And Sam is a married 49-year-old tradie, and he goes out for drinks on a Friday night. And he usually uses lines of Coke, and he drinks very heavily. And while he was out that night, then he scored cocaine, and he arrived home Sunday, substance affected, and of course he kept drinking because he was coming down off the stimulant, so he was using the depressant. He was lying on the lounge, watching graphic porn, and eventually he passed out on the couch. And soon after that, his 14-year-old daughter discovered him asleep and saw the images still visible on his phone. And of course, the parents presented together in couples counselling in crisis. There's a lot of impacts on the relationships, and quite often the partner feels an emotional and a sexual disconnection, and they suspect something's wrong, and they often say, look, I knew that something wasn't right. And the person addicted is going to experience erectile dysfunction for the following reasons. And one's a bit obvious because they're used to doing these activities while on stimulants. They've maxed out their sexual credit card, masturbating and watching porn, getting onto chat lines. Perhaps they've been exchanging images, and they're having external sexual encounters. And what happens is they need so much dopamine that they're now in a virtual world. And their sexual expectations become unrealistic. And sex with their partner just does not do it for them anymore. And they avoid initiating sex because of lack of libido. They reject their partner's advances. And the partner then feels the partner is no longer sexually attracted to them. And the partner begins to question their own attractiveness. And the partner often presents with low self-efficacy and perceives they have a negative body image. And an example of this, in a session, a female partner looked at her fiancé and she said, look, I don't understand this. I caught you in the bathroom masturbating, watching porn during one of your benders, and I wanted to do XXX to you, but you never come near me. And what really, really peeves me off is the images you were viewing, the girl was a lot slimmer than me. So let's just have a little bit of a look at the treatment now. It's useful to consider Adlerian paradigm in the treatment of ASISA. And Alfred Adler said that our thoughts determine our feelings, and this is fuel for our behaviour. So think of it in terms of any addiction. We have a thought, and we could call that the trigger. Then we have a feeling, so we become anxious, and then we have a craving. And of course, then we behave accordingly, and we act out on our addiction. So now let's have a look at, if you want to say, the maintenance stage of the cycle of change, how we have to look at that. And you have clients presenting because the midbrain is what I call, or one of my clients coined the phrase, dopamine central. This is the pleasure centre of the brain. And then we've got the frontal lobe, the logical one. That's the logical part of the brain. And people come for addictions and ASISA because the dopamine central then convinces and overrides that logical brain with that self-dialogue or rationalisation, giving permission. And clients are then they're taught how to recognise this self-dialogue, because usually this self-dialogue starts pretty much in the early stage of the craving cycle. So what we've got to do there, what do? We develop a plan. But we've also got to keep in mind that chicken and the egg situation I talked about earlier. And this is pretty complex. It's not just a matter of let's develop a plan, hey? Because we have to look at very much underlying issues. And we have to look at sexual anxieties. We have to look at unsureness around a person's sexuality. We have to look at any coexisting disorders as identified by FOM, and these must be addressed in the counselling context, or if it's out of our expertise, we might have to refer on. Sometimes I've referred to a psychiatrist. It's also essential, it's really essential to go into the history of the client. So you go back, so there's sometimes attachment issues. You should be familiar with John Bowlby. And then we've got look at the couple's emotional and sexual intimacy and have a look if they've gone down that spiral. And a plan, when we look at a plan, the plan can range from total abstinence of alcohol, stimulants, and sexual acting out. We can then look at moderation of alcohol, provided that there's no dependency there, and cessation of stimulants, porn, and acting out. And the really important thing here, and we've got to realise and understand this, is when a person ceases to watch porn and act on their sexual addiction, their dopamine experience slowly returns to their pre-addiction. So their stimulation returns to their biological libido patterns, and they move out of their fantasy world and they don't need that anymore. Post-addiction, many couples report the regaining of the sexual intimacy. And often the partner attends, and I really encourage this, and include the partner in the plan, because if the partner's struggling, they're able to provide support. And this is extremely empowering in itself, because what that does, it fosters the shared feelings, perhaps that haven't been shared before. And that is really putting the seeds of trust back into that relationship. I know what he's thinking. When partners ask about how long life will take for their world to get back to normal, I've adopted Strobe and Schutt's grief dual process model, because I think we've got to recognise that giving up an addiction is a loss issue. So I think it's logical that I put in or encompass some of grief theory. So in early stages of recovery, a person then is going to oscillate between intense thoughts and cravings, and then they'll be distracted from it. Something will distract them, and they'll move away from that. And as time marches on, they're going to have less intense thoughts and cravings, and they'll move more into the distraction mode as the addiction experience fades. When we look at the prevention and relapse prevention, which always needs to be covered, I use this metaphor. What I say is, I call it the wheat field metaphor. But imagine if you're a wheat farmer and you're all working in the wheat field, and there's a farmhouse there, and there's a long, winding track going to it. And you have a look and you find that there's a shorter way. So what you're going to do is you decide to tread down this much shorter path. And you're doing well, and you're getting there, and things are going fantastic. And one day it rains and it hails and the tractor won't start. And farmhand takes a day off and you're tired and you're stressed and you feel today is just too hard to tread down that track. So what are you going to do? You take the default. You take the familiar path. And that's like the same as building those new neural pathways that we've got in our brain. And this explains and probably normalises a little bit of a lapse. And if we learn from our experience, we can then gain new tools for the next time we're tempted to go into that default. And this is a really important one, and it's always alarm bells if everyone says, oh, I'm fine, I'm really good. And you find people might drop out of therapy, but then they'll come back into therapy because clients always need to be aware of identifying times when they're at risk. They continually need to refer to their plan. And I've had clients that have written, I had one guy that was a financial analysis that did about 40-page spreadsheet on his plan. But he said that if he doesn't look at his plan, he lapses. So they have to refer to their plan because cravings can come from the left field, often when the client is doing really well. And finally, we've got to look at the limitations of all the treatment plans and everything. But the important thing, and I think everyone should know this, that as with all addictions, the client is usually the last person to see they've got an addiction. And if the client doesn't see that, and they're coerced into coming to therapy, there's nothing we can do but harm minimisation. And this often occurs, as I said, when they're coerced, and you can look at that